Last 4th of July at our family barbecue, I casually mentioned buying my third rental property when my golden child brother Brandon overheard and exploded in absolute rage, throwing his drink across the patio. Mom burst into tears as Brandon screamed about how unfair life was. The whole family froze in complete shock until Grandpa Walter started laughing a deep, knowing chuckle that cut through the chaos. He stood up slowly and said the words that changed everything. Funny how the son who got nothing built everything while the one who got everything built nothing. Growing up in suburban Denver, I learned early that being the middle child meant being invisible. My name is Marlon, and while my older brother Brandon commanded every spotlight in our house, I became an expert at blending into the background. Dad owned a successful auto repair shop called Peterson's Automotive, and Mom worked part-time as a school nurse. To the outside world, we looked like a solid middle-class family with two promising sons. But inside our house, there was only room for one star, and Brandon claimed that role before I even understood the game was being played. The signs started small when we were kids. Brandon would get brand new baseball equipment every spring while I inherited his worn-out glove from the previous season. His room got redecorated twice during middle school, with sports posters and a new desk set while I shared the basement room with our cousin Tyler, who lived with us after his parents divorced. When Brandon wanted guitar lessons, Dad wrote the check immediately. When I asked about piano lessons, Mom said we needed to see how the budget looked after Brandon's other expenses. The academic disparity became impossible to ignore during high school. Brandon was a decent student, pulling mostly B's with occasional A's in subjects he enjoyed. But when SAT time came around, Mom and Dad hired a private tutor for $3,000 to boost his scores. I watched this unfold from my bedroom, knowing that when my turn came, I'd be studying alone with library books and free online practice tests. The irony was that I actually scored higher than Brandon when I took the test 2 years later, but our parents dismissed my achievement as test-taking tricks and reminded everyone how much Brandon had improved from his baseline. The college application process revealed the full extent of their favoritism. Brandon applied exclusively to Ivy League schools, with our parents hiring an educational consultant for $2,000 to polish his essays and application strategy. They drove him to campus visits across the Northeast, staying in nice hotels and treating each trip like a family vacation. I wasn't even invited along, spending those weekends working my part-time job at the local grocery store. When my senior year arrived, I applied to state schools entirely on my own, researching requirements and filling out applications at the kitchen table after everyone went to bed. I received a partial scholarship to Colorado State University, covering about 60% of tuition costs. You'd think this would earn some recognition, but the announcement got overshadowed by Brandon's acceptance to Yale. Dad took the whole family out to dinner to celebrate Brandon's achievement, while my scholarship letter got a brief "That's nice, honey," before the conversation returned to Yale's prestige. The BMW incident still burns in my memory. Brandon's 20th birthday coincided with his sophomore year at Yale, and our parents surprised him with a leased BMW 3 Series when he came home for winter break. They presented it with a giant red bow in the driveway, taking dozens of photos for social media. The car represented everything Brandon had come to expect: immediate gratification, luxury, and recognition of his special status in the family hierarchy. My 18th birthday fell just 4 months later, but the contrast couldn't have been starker. While Brandon got a luxury car worth more than most people's annual salary, I received a used bicycle our dad found at a garage sale for $35. Mom wrapped it with newspaper and said it would help me stay in shape for college. I smiled and thanked them, but something fundamental shifted inside me that day. I understood that no matter what I accomplished, I would never measure up to Brandon in their eyes. Throughout this time, I began noticing subtle signs of financial strain in our household. Dad started working longer hours at the shop, often staying until 8 or 9 at night, instead of coming home for dinner. Mom picked up extra nursing shifts at the hospital, leaving Tyler and me to heat up frozen meals on weeknights. I'd hear hushed arguments between them after they thought we were asleep, catching fragments about expenses and priorities, and making it work somehow. The stress showed on Dad's face as he aged what seemed like 5 years in the span of 12 months. His hair went completely gray, and he developed a persistent cough from working in the shop's dusty environment for extended hours. Mom lost weight and started drinking more coffee, constantly moving with nervous energy that suggested underlying worry about their financial situation. During the spring of my senior year, while helping Dad organize tax documents in his home office, I accidentally discovered paperwork that explained everything. Hidden beneath a stack of invoices, I found mortgage documents showing that our parents had taken a $25,000 second mortgage on our family home to pay for Brandon's first year at Yale. The papers detailed monthly payments of $450, extending their mortgage by an additional 10 years. I stared at those documents for several minutes, feeling sick to my stomach. Our parents had literally mortgaged our family's future to fund Brandon's Ivy League education, and they'd never told anyone about the sacrifice they were making. Meanwhile, they acted like my partial scholarship was somehow less impressive than Brandon's acceptance to a school they couldn't actually afford. That night, I lay in my basement bedroom listening to the house settle around me and understanding that I was completely on my own. Not only would I receive no financial support for college, but my parents had actually jeopardized their own financial security to give Brandon every advantage possible. The discovery hardened something inside me, replacing hurt feelings with cold determination. If they wanted to bet everything on Brandon, I'd prove them wrong by succeeding without any help at all. Looking back now, I realize that discovery was actually a gift. It forced me to develop self-reliance and financial literacy years earlier than most people. While Brandon learned to expect support and bailouts, I learned to calculate costs and save money and work for everything I wanted. But at 18, sitting in that basement room with those mortgage papers fresh in my mind, all I felt was the crushing weight of being utterly alone in a family that was supposed to support me. Colorado State University became my sanctuary, even though I arrived there with barely enough money to cover the expenses my scholarship didn't handle. While Brandon enjoyed the prestigious halls of Yale, I settled into the cheapest dormitory on campus, sharing a cramped room with a roommate from rural Wyoming named Jake, who worked just as hard as I did to afford his education. My daily routine revolved around survival and academic success. I worked 3 different jobs to cover living expenses 20 hours weekly, at the campus bookstore, weekend landscaping for a local company, and evening tutoring sessions helping struggling students with mathematics. Between classes and work, I survived on ramen noodles and whatever free food I could find at campus events, calculating every dollar I spent. The landscaping job taught me valuable lessons beyond earning money. Working alongside guys like Carlos and Tommy, both in their 30s with families to support, I learned about construction property maintenance and the satisfaction of physical labor. They treated me with respect because I showed up reliably and worked hard, never complaining about difficult tasks or weather conditions. These men became my real mentors during college, teaching me practical skills that would prove invaluable later. Meanwhile, Brandon's Yale experience unfolded like a social media fairy tale. Our parents visited him frequently, posting proud photos of themselves on campus and gushing about his fraternity life. They documented his spring break trips to Cancun and his summer internship at a prestigious Manhattan law firm, treating each update like a personal victory. Phone calls home always centered on Brandon's latest achievement or social event. When I mentioned making Dean's List for maintaining a 3.8 grade point average while working 3 jobs, Mom's response was typical. "That's nice, honey. But guess what Brandon did this week? He got invited to a networking dinner with Yale alumni who work on Wall Street." The conversation immediately shifted to Brandon's connections and opportunities, while my academic achievement became a footnote. Despite the constant comparison, I threw myself into learning everything I could about business and finance. My double major required intense studying, but I discovered I had a natural aptitude for understanding markets, investments, and financial planning. Professors noticed my dedication and offered me a research assistant position, which provided additional income and valuable experience, analyzing economic trends. During my junior year, I started a small eBay business selling refurbished electronics I bought from campus surplus sales. Students constantly upgraded their laptops and phones, creating opportunities to buy their old devices, cheaply repair them, using skills I learned from Dad's auto shop, and resell them for profit. Within 6 months, this side business generated $500 monthly, more than my campus bookstore job. The summer between my junior and senior years revealed just how deeply our parents had committed themselves to Brandon's success. I came home to work full-time at a local construction company, planning to save every dollar possible for my final year. But the house felt different, charged with tension I hadn't noticed during brief holiday visits. Late one evening, I overheard a heated argument between Mom and Dad in their bedroom. Dad's voice carried through the thin walls. "The credit cards are maxed out, Linda. Brandon's fraternity dues alone cost more than Marlon's entire semester." Mom's response was defensive but worried. "He needs those connections for his career. You know how important networking is in his field." "What about Marlon's field?" Dad asked, his voice rising. "Our other son is working himself to death, and we haven't helped him with anything." There was a long pause before Mom replied, "Brandon has more potential. He's at Yale, for crying out loud. Sometimes you have to invest in the child who can go the furthest." That conversation confirmed what I'd suspected since finding the mortgage papers. Our parents viewed Brandon as their investment with the highest potential return, while I represented the safe, predictable option who could take care of himself. The realization stung, but it also motivated me to prove them spectacularly wrong. I spent that summer reading every book about real estate investing I could find at the library. Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad opened my eyes to the difference between assets and liabilities, while other books taught me about cash flow leverage and building wealth through property ownership. I developed a detailed plan for buying my first rental property within 2 years of graduation. My senior year brought academic success, but personal disappointment. I graduated summa cum laude, with my double major earning recognition from both the business and finance departments. My professors encouraged me to pursue graduate school, offering strong recommendation letters and connections to MBA programs. But I had different plans focused on entering the workforce and beginning my real estate journey. 3 weeks before graduation, I received devastating news that crystallized everything wrong with my family's priorities. I went to the bank to check on the college fund my grandmother had established for me years earlier, expecting to find about $8,000 she'd saved for my graduate school expenses. The account manager, Mrs. Patterson, reviewed the records with obvious discomfort. "I'm sorry, Marlon," she said, avoiding eye contact. The account was emptied gradually over the past 3 years. The authorized withdrawals were made by your parents, all properly documented. She showed me the transaction history, and my stomach dropped. Every withdrawal corresponded exactly with Brandon's tuition payment dates. They had systematically stolen my grandmother's gift to fund his Yale education. I sat in that bank lobby for 20 minutes, staring at the empty account statement and feeling something break inside me. My parents hadn't just failed to support my education. They had actively taken money designated specifically for me and given it to Brandon instead. The betrayal went beyond favoritism into outright theft, justified in their minds by Brandon's supposedly superior potential. That night, I called my grandmother in Phoenix and told her about the empty account. Her silence stretched long enough that I worried the connection had dropped. Finally, she spoke in a voice I'd never heard before, cold and furious. "Marlon, honey, I saved that money specifically for you because I knew you'd use it wisely. What they did is unconscionable." 2 weeks later, Grandma sent me a check for $10,000 along with a note that said, This is what your original fund would have grown to with interest. Don't tell your parents where it came from. Use it to start the life you deserve. That money became the down payment for my first rental property, launching the real estate career that would eventually overshadow everything Brandon accomplished. Graduation day arrived with typical family dynamics. While I walked across the stage to receive my diploma with highest honors, our parents spent most of the ceremony discussing Brandon's upcoming bar exam and job prospects at white shoe law firms. My achievement became background noise to their anxiety about Brandon's next steps, perfectly summarizing 18 years of being the invisible son. The confrontation about my empty college fund happened 2 weeks after graduation in our family's kitchen, on a humid June morning. I had requested a family meeting, naively believing that presenting the facts calmly would lead to honest discussion and perhaps an apology. Instead, I discovered that people can justify almost anything when their worldview depends on it. We didn't steal anything. Dad insisted, his face flushing red as he gripped his coffee mug. We borrowed that money temporarily. Everything we've done has been for both of you boys. Mom nodded vigorously, her voice taking on the defensive tone I remembered from childhood arguments. Brandon needed that support to establish his career. Once he's successful, we'll pay it all back. When I pointed out that they'd never asked permission or even informed me about the withdrawals, Mom's response revealed the depth of their rationalization. You're the responsible one, Marlon. You don't need money to succeed like Brandon does. You'll figure it out on your own. The circular logic was staggering. Because I'd been forced to become self-reliant, they felt justified in giving me nothing, while Brandon's dependence somehow proved he deserved everything. The promise to repay the money became an ongoing excuse that evolved over the following months. First, they'd pay it back when Brandon finished law school, then when he passed the bar exam, then when he found the right job. Each deadline passed without acknowledgement, and eventually they stopped mentioning repayment altogether, as if the debt had never existed. I moved into a 400-square-foot studio apartment in downtown Denver, furnishing it entirely from thrift stores and garage sales. My bed was a futon I bought for $60, and my kitchen table was a wooden door I mounted on cinder blocks. The place looked like a college dorm room, but it was mine, paid for with money I'd earned through my own labor. During family dinners at home, our parents constantly compared my living situation to Brandon's sophisticated dorm lifestyle, and later his apartment near Yale Law School. They worried about whether his place had adequate heating and security, while treating my modest studio like a temporary phase I'd outgrow once I got serious about my career. I found work as a loan processor at Rocky Mountain Credit Union, a regional bank serving middle-class families throughout Colorado. The starting salary of $32,000 wasn't impressive, but the position offered excellent training in mortgage lending and real estate finance. My supervisor, Janet Walsh, recognized my analytical skills and work ethic, assigning me complex loan applications that taught me to evaluate property values and borrower qualifications. Every evening after work, I drove around Denver neighborhoods, studying property values and rental markets. I calculated purchase prices, estimated renovation costs, and projected cash flows until I could evaluate investment potential at a glance. My weekends were spent at estate sales and auctions, buying undervalued furniture and electronics to refinish and resell through my expanding eBay business. The financial discipline I developed during this period shaped every decision I made. I lived on $20,000 annually, banking the remaining $12,000 plus profits from my side businesses. While coworkers bought new cars and took vacations, I drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic I'd bought for $3,500 and took my lunches to work in brown paper bags. Brandon graduated from Yale Law School during my second year at the credit union, and our family traveled to New Haven for another lavish celebration. They spent over $2,000 on the graduation weekend, staying at expensive hotels and taking Brandon's friends to dinner at upscale restaurants. Dad's pride was obvious as he introduced himself as the father of the Yale Law graduate, to anyone who would listen. During Brandon's graduation speech to family and friends, he talked extensively about the privilege of opportunity and how family support made everything possible. Our parents beamed as he thanked them for their sacrifices and investment in his education. I sat in the back row calculating that their total investment in Brandon's undergraduate and law school education had exceeded $200,000 when including tuition living expenses and all the extras. The cruel irony was that while our parents bankrupted themselves supporting Brandon, I was quietly building the foundation for real wealth. Through careful saving and strategic side businesses, I had accumulated $15,000 by early spring, enough for a down payment on my first rental property. I spent months analyzing potential purchases, finally identifying a small duplex in a working-class neighborhood that was underpriced due to cosmetic issues. 6 months after Brandon's law school graduation, I closed on that duplex for $85,000, putting down 5% and financing the rest through the credit union where I worked. The seller, an elderly widow named Mrs. Rodriguez, had been overwhelmed by property management and was eager to sell quickly. The duplex needed paint-new flooring and updated fixtures, but the structure was solid and the neighborhood was gentrifying slowly. I spent every weekend for 3 months renovating the property, learning plumbing and electrical work through YouTube videos and advice from my old landscaping co-workers. Carlos taught me how to install laminate flooring, while Tommy showed me basic electrical repairs that saved thousands in contractor costs. The physical work was exhausting, but satisfying in a way my desk job never provided. By fall, both units were rented to stable tenants at market rates, generating positive cash flow of $400 monthly after all expenses. That money represented true passive income assets working for me, instead of me working for money. For the first time in my life, I felt genuinely optimistic about my financial future. The contrast with Brandon's situation became impossible to ignore. Despite his Ivy League credentials, he failed the bar exam twice, each failure shaking his confidence and our parents' certainty about his inevitable success. Instead of the prestigious Manhattan law firm position everyone expected, Brandon moved back into his childhood bedroom, ostensibly studying for his third attempt at the bar. The timing was remarkable. During the same month that Brandon returned home unemployed despite his expensive education, I became a property owner, generating rental income. But our parents' response to these developments revealed how deeply their favoritism was embedded. They treated Brandon's return as temporary setback before his inevitable breakthrough, while viewing my real estate purchase as a risky speculation that would probably fail. Real estate is so unstable, Mom warned when I mentioned the duplex purchase. What if the market crashes? Brandon's education is permanent. No one can take away his law degree. Dad nodded agreement, adding his own concerns. Property management is a lot of work, son. Brandon's going to have a much easier career once he passes that exam. Their inability to see reality was almost breathtaking. Brandon was 25 years old, living in their basement with no income and growing debt while I was building equity and cash flow through real estate investment, yet they remained convinced that his potential outweighed my actual achievements. The duplex success motivated me to expand more aggressively, but it also deepened my understanding of how thoroughly they'd written me off as the less promising son. My promotion to loan officer came with a salary increase to $48,000 and recognition as one of the credit union's top performers in helping first-time homebuyers navigate the lending process. Clients appreciated my patient explanations and genuine interest in their success, leading to strong referral business and commendations from management. Janet Walsh nominated me for the Colorado Credit Union Association's Emerging Professional Award, which I won, despite being only 24 years old. The duplex had been a tremendous learning experience, and both tenants renewed their leases at modest rent increases that boosted my monthly cash flow to $460. I reinvested every penny of rental income, plus continued aggressive saving from my salary building toward the next property purchase. My eBay business had evolved into weekend estate sale hunting, where I'd buy undervalued antiques and collectibles for resale online. Meanwhile, Brandon's struggles intensified, despite finally passing the bar exam on his third attempt. The legal job market in Colorado was competitive, and his Yale credentials weren't enough to compensate for his lack of networking skills or practical experience. He'd grown accustomed to opportunities being handed to him, and the reality of job searching revealed how unprepared he was for rejection and competition. Local law firms were polite during interviews, but ultimately chose candidates who demonstrated hunger and initiative qualities that Brandon had never needed to develop. His resume was impressive on paper, but he came across as entitled during interviews, expecting positions to be offered based on his education rather than his ability to contribute immediately to a firm's success. Our parents refused to acknowledge Brandon's employment struggles, maintaining the fiction that he was being selective and evaluating multiple offers. When relatives asked about his job search at family gatherings, Mom would say he had several opportunities under consideration and was taking time to choose the right fit for his career goals. The denial was complete and increasingly desperate. During this period, I met Sarah Patterson, a registered nurse at Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital, through mutual friends at a house party. She was 26, originally from a small town in western Colorado, and had worked her way through nursing school with the same determination I'd shown in business. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours, covering everything from real estate investing to her experiences in the hospital's emergency department. Sarah was impressed by my work ethic and long-term planning, but she also noticed the family dynamics during our first dinner at my parents' house. Throughout the meal, Mom and Dad talked almost exclusively about Brandon's legal career and their hopes for his future success, while barely acknowledging my presence. When Sarah asked about my work at the credit union, Dad changed the subject to Brandon's bar exam scores within 2 minutes. After dinner, Sarah pulled me aside and said something I'd never heard before. "Your family doesn't see you clearly at all. You're the most driven, responsible person I've met, but they treat you like background noise." Her observation was both validating and heartbreaking, confirming that outsiders could immediately see what my parents had missed for years. Our relationship developed quickly, built on shared values of hard work, financial responsibility, and mutual respect. Sarah had grown up in a family where achievements were celebrated equally, and she couldn't understand how parents could show such obvious favoritism between their children. Her perspective helped me realize that my family's treatment wasn't normal or acceptable. 6 months after we started dating, Dad made the decision that perfectly encapsulated his misplaced priorities. He had business cards printed for Brandon reading Brandon Peterson Legal Consultant, and gave him a corner desk in the auto shop's office space. The arrangement was supposed to give Brandon professional credibility while he searched for a real legal position, but no clients ever called the number on those cards. Brandon spent his days at the shop playing games on his phone and occasionally researching legal questions that never led to actual work. Dad proudly told customers that his son was a Yale-trained lawyer who could handle their legal needs. But Brandon had no experience with the practical legal issues small business owners faced. The whole setup was an expensive fiction that allowed our parents to maintain the illusion of Brandon's professional success. During my second year as a loan officer, I identified another undervalued property, a small 3-bedroom house that needed significant renovation, but was located in a neighborhood showing early signs of gentrification. The seller was a bank handling a foreclosure, motivated to close quickly without extensive negotiations. After 18 months of aggressive saving, I had enough for the down payment plus renovation costs. I closed on the house for $67,000, immediately beginning weekends and evenings renovations that were more extensive than the duplex project. The kitchen required complete replacement, the bathrooms needed updating, and every room needed new flooring and fresh paint. Carlos and Tommy helped with the major work, teaching me advanced skills like tile installation and cabinet hanging. The renovation took 4 months of intensive work, but the transformation was remarkable. I'd purchased the house for $67,000, spent $12,000 on improvements, and created a property worth $95,000 that rented for $1,100 monthly. After mortgage payments and expenses, the house generated net cash flow of $380 monthly. Sarah and I got engaged during the house renovation, planning a simple ceremony that reflected our practical values rather than expensive fantasies. We wanted to celebrate our commitment without creating financial stress, so we chose a small venue, invited only close family and friends, and focused on the meaning of marriage rather than the spectacle of a wedding. Our parents' response to the engagement announcement was predictably disappointing. Instead of expressing happiness for our relationship, Mom immediately began comparing our modest wedding plans to the elaborate ceremony Brandon would supposedly have someday. She worried aloud that our simple reception wouldn't properly represent the family's status, and Dad suggested postponing the wedding until we could do it right with a bigger budget. The engagement party revealed the depth of their self-absorption. Throughout the evening, our parents spent their time talking to relatives about Brandon's legal consulting practice and his bright future prospects, while barely mentioning my real estate success or promotion at work. Sarah watched this performance with growing incredulity, later telling me she'd never witnessed such obvious favoritism at what should have been a celebration of our relationship. 3 months before our wedding, Brandon approached me with a request that exposed the full extent of his financial irresponsibility. He asked to speak privately, then explained that he'd accumulated $32,000 in credit card debt trying to maintain his lifestyle while unemployed. The debt included charges for expensive restaurants, designer clothes, car lease payments, and entertainment expenses that made no sense for someone without income. "I need a temporary loan of $15,000, he said, unable to make eye contact. "Just until my legal practice takes off. I'll pay you back with interest once I get some big cases." The delusion was staggering. Brandon had no clients, no legal experience, and no realistic plan for earning income yet. He genuinely believed that success was just around the corner if he could maintain appearances a little longer. I declined his request as diplomatically as possible, explaining that my money was committed to property investments and wedding expenses. But the conversation revealed that Brandon had learned nothing from his failures. Instead of accepting responsibility for his spending or developing marketable skills, he still expected family members to bail him out while he waited for opportunities to materialize magically. That night, I realized our parents had created a monster through their unlimited support and protection from consequences. Brandon had never learned to budget work consistently or persevere through setbacks because someone always rescued him. Now, at 26 years old, he was functionally helpless despite his expensive education, while I had built real wealth and skills through necessity and determination. By my 30th birthday, my rental property portfolio was generating $1,200 in monthly passive income, combined with my credit union salary that had increased to $56,000 annually. I was financially secure in a way that most people my age couldn't imagine. But our parents remained focused on Brandon's theoretical potential rather than my demonstrated success. Sarah and I married in October at a small venue in the Rocky Mountain foothills, surrounded by 60 of our closest friends and family members. The ceremony was beautiful and meaningful, reflecting our values of commitment and partnership. But even on our wedding day, our parents found ways to shift attention to Brandon, introducing him to other guests as their Yale Law graduate son, while describing me simply as working at a bank. Our honeymoon was a 4-day weekend in Estes Park, hiking and relaxing in a cabin we rented through one of those home-sharing websites. We planned the modest trip carefully within our budget, prioritizing experiences over expense. Meanwhile, our parents had taken Brandon on a 2-week European vacation the previous summer, documenting their travels with daily social media posts about visiting historic sites and fine dining. The contrast in treatment had become so extreme that extended family members began commenting privately. My Aunt Jennifer pulled Sarah aside during the wedding reception to apologize for the obvious favoritism, saying she'd watched the pattern for years and felt terrible about how I'd been overlooked. Uncle Mark told me directly that he thought our parents were making a huge mistake focusing all their energy on Brandon while ignoring my achievements. Brandon's credit card debt had grown to $50,000, funded by multiple cards he'd obtained using our parents' address, and their willingness to provide employment verification for his fictitious legal practice. He was essentially unemployed, but maintained the facade of professional success through careful social media curation and our parents' enabling lies to friends and relatives. The BMW lease had become a monthly burden of $640, but our parents continued making payments because they believed the car projected success that would somehow attract legal clients. The circular logic was remarkable. Brandon needed to appear successful to become successful, so they subsidized his lifestyle indefinitely while he waited for opportunities that never materialized. Meanwhile, I was quietly building real wealth through disciplined investing and strategic property acquisitions. 2 years after buying the house, I closed on my third investment property, a small apartment building with 4 units that generated $1,800 monthly in rental income. The building required minor cosmetic work but was structurally sound and located near the light rail line that connected downtown Denver to the airport. My total real estate portfolio was now worth approximately $350,000, with combined monthly cash flow exceeding $2,000 after all expenses. The passive income nearly equaled my salary, putting me on track for financial independence by my mid-30s. I was living proof that focused effort and smart investing could build wealth faster than prestigious credentials and family connections. Dad had begun talking about retirement and succession planning for the auto shop, which employed 8 mechanics and generated steady profits serving the middle-class neighborhoods around Denver. I assumed he would sell the business when he retired since neither Brandon nor I had training in automotive repair. But during a casual conversation, I mentioned my interest in possibly buying the shop as an investment opportunity. Dad's response revealed how completely he'd dismissed my business acumen. The auto shop is too complicated for someone without experience, Marlon. Brandon has the education to understand complex business operations. You're doing fine with your little rental properties, but running a real business requires different skills. The condescension was breathtaking, especially since I'd already demonstrated success in property management, tenant relations, and financial analysis. That conversation prompted me to research the auto shop's financial performance more carefully. Through public records and industry databases, I discovered that Peterson's Automotive generated approximately $250,000 in annual revenue with profit margins around 15%. The business was valuable, but not particularly complex, relying on reputation-skilled mechanics and consistent customer service, rather than sophisticated strategy. Grandpa Walter, Dad's 78-year-old father, had been watching family dynamics with growing concern. He'd built a successful construction company through decades of hard work, ultimately employing over 40 people before selling the business and retiring comfortably. During one of our rare private conversations, he told me he was proud of my work ethic and financial discipline, hinting that he understood the family situation more clearly than he let on. "Your grandmother and I raised your father to value hard work over education," Grandpa said during a quiet moment at Easter dinner. "Seems like he forgot that lesson with his own boys. College is fine, but character and persistence matter more than degrees." His words carried weight because he'd lived through the Great Depression and built success through grit rather than privileges. 3 weeks later, while visiting my parents to help Dad with some household repairs, I overheard him on the phone with his accountant discussing succession planning and tax implications of gifting business assets to children. My heart sank as I realized they were seriously considering transferring ownership of the auto shop to Brandon, as some kind of birthday gift, despite his complete lack of automotive knowledge or business experience. I attempted to discuss my interest in the business more directly, explaining how my real estate experience had taught me property management, customer relations, and financial analysis that would translate well to running an auto shop. I even offered to work part-time at the shop to learn the operational details while continuing my banking career. Dad's dismissal was swift and absolute. Brandon has the educational background to handle complex business decisions. You wouldn't understand the regulatory requirements, insurance issues, and financial planning involved in running a real company. The irony was overwhelming. I'd been successfully managing multiple properties, dealing with local regulations, insurance claims, and financial planning for years, while Brandon couldn't manage his own credit card payments. Besides, Dad continued, Brandon's legal training will help him navigate the business world much better than your banking experience. Law school teaches analytical thinking and problem solving in ways that other programs don't. I wanted to point out that Brandon's analytical thinking hadn't helped him find employment or manage his finances, but I knew the argument was pointless. The final crushing blow came when I discovered the specific details of their succession plan. Through careful observation and overheard phone conversations, I learned that our parents intended to transfer ownership of Peterson's Automotive to Brandon as a gift for his 28th birthday, scheduled for the following month. The business was worth approximately $400,000, representing their life's work and primary asset aside from the family home. They planned to present the transfer as Brandon finally finding his true calling after law school didn't work out, spinning the story as a strategic career pivot rather than an admission that his expensive education had been largely worthless. Mom had already started talking to relatives about how Brandon would modernize the business and expand into new markets, as if his lack of automotive knowledge was actually an advantage. That night, I sat in my modest apartment with Sarah, finally admitting how deeply my parents' favoritism had affected me. "I'll never be good enough in their eyes," I said, feeling the weight of 30 years of being the overlooked son. Brandon could fail at everything and they'd still find ways to give him opportunities I'll never get. Sarah held my hand and reminded me of something important. You don't need their approval to succeed. You've built more real wealth than Brandon ever will. And you did it without any help. That's actually more impressive than anything he's accomplished. Her words were comforting, but they couldn't erase the pain of realizing my parents would always bet against me no matter what I achieved. The plan to give Brandon the auto shop crystallized everything wrong with our family dynamics. Despite his unemployment, massive debt, and complete lack of relevant experience, he would receive a $400,000 business gift, while I continued being treated like the son with limited potential. The injustice was so extreme that I began planning my exit strategy from family gatherings, knowing I couldn't continue pretending everything was normal. The annual 4th of July barbecue had been a Peterson family tradition for over 20 years, hosted in our parents' backyard, with extended relatives driving in from across Colorado and neighboring states. This year's gathering included 23 people: aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends, and Grandpa Walter, who'd driven down from Fort Collins despite his arthritis, making long trips increasingly difficult. I arrived with Sarah around 2 in the afternoon, bringing potato salad and beer as requested. The backyard looked festive with red, white, and blue decorations, and Dad was manning his prized barbecue setup, grilling burgers and hot dogs for the crowd. Mom buzzed around arranging side dishes and refilling drinks, playing the perfect hostess while keeping everyone's plates full. Brandon arrived 30 minutes later in his BMW wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Despite being unemployed for over a year, he maintained an expensive wardrobe funded entirely by credit cards and our parents' continued support. He greeted everyone with confident handshakes and charming small talk, playing the role of successful young professional with practiced ease. The early part of the gathering followed familiar patterns. Brandon positioned himself at the center of conversations, regaling relatives with stories about his Yale experiences and carefully vague references to his legal consulting practice. Our parents beamed with pride, introducing him repeatedly as their Ivy League graduate. Daoud, while I blended into the background, helping with food service and cleanup. Around 4:30, I found myself in a quiet corner of the patio, talking with my cousin Jessica, who was a nurse practitioner in Colorado Springs. She'd always been supportive of my unconventional path and was genuinely interested in hearing about my real estate investments. Our conversation was low-key and casual, focusing on market trends and property management challenges. The rental market has been really strong this year. I told Jessica, explaining how both my duplex and single-family house had waiting lists when the current leases expired. I actually just closed on my third property last month, a small apartment building near the light rail. The cash flow projections look really promising. The words "third property" apparently carried across the patio more clearly than I'd intended. I noticed Brandon's head turn sharply in my direction, his expression shifting from casual confidence to something darker. For a moment, I thought he might join our conversation, but instead his face began reddening with an emotion I couldn't immediately identify. Jessica continued asking about my investment strategy, genuinely curious about how someone our age had built a property portfolio. I was explaining my approach to evaluating neighborhood trends when Brandon's voice suddenly cut through the background noise of the party. "Oh, that's just perfect," he shouted, his words loaded with venom. "Marlon gets to sit there bragging about his little real estate empire while I can't even get a decent job interview." The entire gathering went silent, every conversation stopping as all eyes turned toward Brandon's increasingly agitated face. "Brandon, honey, calm down," Mom said nervously, but he was just getting started. His voice rose even higher as he continued his tirade. "Do you know how unfair this is? I did everything right. I went to Yale, I have a law degree, but somehow Marlon is the one buying properties and acting like he's some kind of business genius." The accusation was so absurd that I didn't know how to respond. I hadn't been bragging or acting superior. I'd been having a quiet conversation about market conditions with a family member who'd asked specific questions. But Brandon's perception of the situation revealed how deeply his ego had been wounded by my success. "I'm not bragging about anything," I said quietly, hoping to defuse the situation. Jessica asked about my investments, so I was explaining how the rental market works. But Brandon was beyond rational discussion, his frustration and jealousy finally exploding after months of being contained by social expectations. "You're always showing off," he screamed, his face now completely flushed. "First it was the duplex, then the house. Now you're buying apartment buildings. Meanwhile, I can't get anyone to take my law degree seriously." The irony was staggering. Brandon was upset that his credentials hadn't automatically translated to success, while I'd built wealth through actual work and smart decisions. That's when he completely lost control. Brandon grabbed his beer bottle from the nearby table and hurled it across the patio with tremendous force. The bottle shattered against the wooden fence with a loud crash, sending glass fragments scattering across the concrete. Several relatives jumped back instinctively, and Uncle Mark quickly moved his two young daughters away from the broken glass. Mom immediately burst into tears, her carefully orchestrated family gathering dissolving into chaos. "Brandon, what are you doing?" she sobbed, rushing toward him with her hands outstretched. "This is supposed to be a nice family day. Why are you fighting with your brother?" But Brandon wasn't finished. "Ask him why he has to rub his success in everyone's faces," he yelled, pointing an accusatory finger in my direction. "Ask him why he can't just keep his mouth shut about his properties instead of making everyone feel bad." The projection was remarkable. He was the one making a scene and embarrassing the family, but somehow I was responsible for his emotional meltdown. Dad immediately took Brandon's side, as I'd expected. Marlon, you need to be more sensitive to your brother's situation, he said sternly, his voice carrying disappointment that was obviously directed at me. You know he's been struggling with his career transition. Maybe you could show a little more consideration. The injustice of being blamed for Brandon's outburst while he received sympathy for throwing a tantrum was overwhelming. Aunt Jennifer spoke up from across the patio. Wait a minute, Jim. Marlon was having a quiet conversation about his work. Brandon's the one who started yelling and throwing things. Her intervention was brave, but it only intensified the family divide. Other relatives began exchanging uncomfortable glances, clearly witnessing dysfunction they'd suspected, but never seen displayed so blatantly. Cousin Jessica put her hand on my shoulder and said firmly, Marlon was just answering my questions about real estate. There's nothing wrong with being successful through hard work. As the tension reached its peak with Mom still crying and Brandon still glaring at me with unconcealed resentment, Grandpa Walter began laughing. It started as a low chuckle that gradually grew louder, cutting through the chaos with its unexpected warmth and amusement. Everyone turned to look at him, confused by his reaction to the family crisis unfolding before us. Grandpa slowly pushed himself up from his lawn chair, his 78-year-old frame moving deliberately, but with unmistakable authority. The laughter continued as he surveyed the scene. Brandon red-faced and defensive, our parents looking stricken, broken glass scattered across the patio, and me standing there bewildered by the entire situation. You know what's funny about all this? Grandpa said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet gathering. Every person at that barbecue was now focused on him, waiting to hear what wisdom or observation had prompted his amusement during such an uncomfortable moment. He looked directly at Brandon, then at our parents, then at me, his eyes twinkling with something that seemed like satisfaction mixed with long overdue honesty. Funny how the son who got nothing built everything, while the one who got everything built nothing. The words hung in the air like a physical presence impossible to ignore or dismiss. In one sentence, Grandpa had summarized years of family dysfunction and exposed the fundamental truth that our parents had been desperately trying to avoid acknowledging. But he wasn't finished. I've been watching this family for 30 years, and I've been keeping track of what really matters. His voice grew stronger as he continued. One grandson learned to work for what he wanted, and the other learned to expect what he wanted. Guess which approach builds character, and guess which builds entitlement. The silence that followed was absolute. Brandon's mouth hung open. Our parents looked stricken, and every relative was processing the implications of what they'd just heard. Grandpa Walter had been quietly observing our family's dysfunction for decades, and he'd finally decided it was time to speak the truth that everyone had been avoiding. Grandpa Walter remained standing, commanding attention with the quiet authority that comes from 7 decades of hard-earned wisdom. His construction company had employed over 40 people, at its peak built homes for hundreds of families, and provided him with a comfortable retirement funded by genuine achievement rather than inherited advantages. Let me tell you all something about building success, he said, his voice carrying the weight of experience that none of us could dispute. I started my construction business in 1968 with $800 a used pickup truck and absolutely no connections. Nobody handed me anything, nobody co-signed my loans, and nobody bailed me out when I made mistakes. He looked directly at our parents, his expression mixing love with disappointment. Jim and Linda, you meant well with these boys, but you forgot the most important lesson my generation learned. Struggle builds strength while comfort builds weakness. You gave Brandon every advantage possible, and you gave Marlon every disadvantage possible. Now look at the results. The truth of his observation was undeniable. Brandon, despite his Ivy League education and unlimited family support, was unemployed, deeply in debt, and completely dependent on our parents for survival. Meanwhile, I had built real wealth and developed genuine skills through necessity and determination. I've been updating my will for the past 5 years. Grandpa continued, dropping a bombshell that visibly shocked everyone present. My estate is worth approximately $1.2 million accumulated through 40 years of honest work. I originally planned to divide it equally between my grandsons, but watching their different paths has changed my mind. Brandon's face went pale as he realized where this conversation was heading. Our parents looked stricken, probably calculating how much money they'd spent on Brandon's education and wondering if their investment strategy was about to backfire spectacularly. "Marlon will receive $800,000 when I pass," Grandpa announced calmly. "Brandon will receive $100,000, but only if he demonstrates financial responsibility for 2 consecutive years. That means steady employment, paying down his debts, and living within his means without family subsidies." The gasps around the patio were audible. Aunt Jennifer smiled broadly while Uncle Mark nodded approval. Cousin Jessica squeezed my shoulder supportively. The extended family had watched years of obvious favoritism toward Brandon, and they were clearly satisfied to see merit finally rewarded over privilege. "The remaining $300,000 will go to various charities," Grandpa explained. "Organizations that help young people develop work skills and self-reliance, because those are the qualities that actually matter in life." His decision reflected deep thought about the values he wanted to promote and the legacy he hoped to leave. Brandon finally found his voice, but it came out as a desperate whine. "Grandpa, that's not fair. I went to Yale. I have a law degree. I've been working hard to build my career." The delusion was remarkable. He genuinely believed that his credentials entitled him to financial rewards, regardless of his actual accomplishments or behavior. "Son," Grandpa replied gently but firmly, "you haven't worked hard at anything. You've been given every opportunity imaginable, and you've squandered most of them. Meanwhile, your brother built something real with no help from anyone. That's the difference between earning something and expecting something." Our parents looked devastated as the full implications sank in. They'd invested everything in Brandon's supposed potential while overlooking my actual achievements, and now their strategy had backfired in the most public way possible. Dad's face showed the dawning realization that his golden child investment had been a catastrophic mistake. But instead of gloating or celebrating Brandon's comeuppance, I felt something unexpected, genuine sympathy for my brother. Watching him crumble under the weight of truth and consequences, I realized that our parents' favoritism had damaged him as much as it had hurt me. He'd never learned to cope with failure work through setbacks or develop genuine confidence because everything had been handed to him. "Brandon," I said quietly, stepping toward him despite the tension, "I know this is hard to hear, but maybe it's actually an opportunity. You're smart and capable. You just never had to develop those abilities because things came so easily. I could use help with property management and maintenance if you're interested in learning real-world skills." The offer surprised everyone, including myself. But I realized that holding grudges wouldn't help either of us move forward, and Brandon desperately needed to learn what I'd been forced to develop through necessity: self-reliance, financial discipline, and the satisfaction of earning success through effort. Brandon stared at me for a long moment, his anger gradually giving way to something that looked like relief. The pretense of success had been exhausting, and part of him seemed grateful to finally drop the facade. "You'd really let me work with you?" he asked hesitantly. "Even after everything that's happened?" "Family is family," I replied, meaning it. "But it would be real work for real pay with real expectations. No special treatment because of your education or because mom and dad think you're special. You'd start at entry level and earn advancement through performance just like everyone else." Sarah squeezed my hand, proud of the grace I was showing despite years of unfair treatment. Our parents watched this exchange with amazement, probably wondering where they'd gone wrong in understanding their own son's characters. The conversation gradually shifted toward healing and honest communication. Mom admitted through her tears that they'd been so worried about Brandon's potential that they'd taken my success for granted, assuming I didn't need support or recognition. Dad acknowledged that his business succession plans had been based on education rather than demonstrated ability, which was obviously a flawed approach. "I owe you an apology, Marlon," Dad said, his voice heavy with regret. "You've built something impressive entirely on your own, while we were pouring money into Brandon's theoretical future. I'd like to discuss you possibly buying the auto shop when I retire if you're still interested." The offer represented a complete reversal of his previous position, but it came from genuine recognition rather than desperate circumstances. "I'd consider it," I replied carefully, "but as a business transaction, not as charity. If the numbers make sense as an investment, we can explore the possibility." Uncle Mark pulled me aside later in the evening to express his admiration for how I'd handled the confrontation. "You had every right to be bitter and vindictive," he said. "Instead, you offered your brother a chance to rebuild his life. That says more about your character than all the properties you've bought." The gathering continued for several more hours, but with a completely different atmosphere. Extended family members who'd barely acknowledged me in previous years were now asking detailed questions about real estate investing and property management. Brandon sat quietly processing everything that had happened and considering his options. As the evening wound down, Grandpa pulled me aside for a private conversation. "I've been proud of you for years," he said simply. "Watching you build something real without any help reminded me of my own early days in construction. The money in my will isn't charity. It's recognition of merit." 12 months later, the transformation in our family dynamics was remarkable. Brandon had accepted my offer and spent the year learning property maintenance, tenant relations, and basic business operations. He started by cleaning vacant units and doing simple repairs, gradually working his way up to more complex responsibilities as he proved his reliability. The work was humbling for someone with an Ivy League law degree, but it was also healing. Brandon discovered satisfaction in completing tangible tasks and solving practical problems, things his theoretical education had never provided. He was finally developing genuine self-confidence based on competence rather than credentials. His debt situation improved dramatically once he stopped trying to maintain an expensive lifestyle. Brandon moved into a modest apartment, traded the BMW for a reliable used truck, and committed himself to paying down credit cards methodically. For the first time in his adult life, he was living within his means and building toward genuine financial stability. Our parents had to confront the reality that their investment strategy had been fundamentally flawed. They'd spent over $200,000 on Brandon's education while giving me nothing. Yet I'd built more wealth and stability than he'd achieved despite all their support. The lesson was painful but necessary. Dad and I began serious discussions about transferring ownership of Peterson's Automotive when he retired. The business represented an opportunity to diversify beyond real estate, while maintaining the family legacy in a more productive way. My property management experience had taught me customer service, financial planning, and operational efficiency that translated well to running an auto shop. My real estate portfolio had grown to 6 rental units, generating over $3,000 in monthly passive income. Combined with my credit union salary and the potential auto shop acquisition, I was on track for genuine financial independence by age 35. More importantly, I'd built everything through my own efforts, creating lasting satisfaction that no inherited advantage could provide. The most meaningful change was in our family relationships. Mom and Dad finally began treating Brandon and me equally, recognizing our different strengths, rather than comparing us to some imaginary standard. Family dinners became pleasant rather than stressful, with conversations focusing on current projects rather than past achievements or future potential. Grandpa's intervention had forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths, but the result was a healthier family dynamic based on reality rather than delusion. Brandon was learning valuable skills while rebuilding his life on a sustainable foundation. Our parents were developing genuine pride in both sons' accomplishments rather than living vicariously through one child's supposed superiority. Looking back on that 4th of July confrontation, I realized it was the best thing that could have happened to our family. Years of resentment, favoritism, and dysfunction had finally exploded in a way that demanded honest conversation and real change. Sometimes the most difficult truths are also the most liberating. The lesson I learned from those years of being overlooked was ultimately empowering. When people don't believe in you, their doubts become your motivation rather than your limitation. Being forced to succeed independently built character skills and confidence that no amount of family support could have provided. Sometimes the greatest gift is not getting everything handed to you. But perhaps the most important realization was about forgiveness and second chances. Brandon's behavior had been terrible, but it was largely the product of our parents' misguided favoritism rather than fundamental character flaws. When given the opportunity to develop genuine skills and earn real success, he proved capable of growth and change. Our family story demonstrates that it's never too late to correct course and build healthier relationships. The key is honest communication about difficult truths, willingness to change destructive patterns, and commitment to treating people based on their character rather than their credentials or potential. Today, I'm grateful for every challenge I faced and every advantage I didn't receive. Those experiences taught me resilience, resourcefulness, and the deep satisfaction that comes from earning everything you achieve. No amount of money or family support could have provided a better education in the qualities that actually matter in life. I hope this story resonates with anyone who's ever felt overlooked or underestimated by their family. Sometimes being the one who gets nothing is actually the path to building everything. Your worth isn't determined by other people's opinions or support. It's demonstrated through your actions, persistence, and character when nobody's watching. What's your experience with family favoritism or being underestimated? Have you ever had to prove yourself when others didn't believe in your potential? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please like this video if my experience connected with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming challenges, and share this with anyone who might benefit from hearing that success is possible even when the odds seem stacked against you. Thanks for listening to my story, and remember that your biggest setbacks often become the foundation for your greatest comebacks.